say that it's generally built around 5 pillars. Gender and youth empowerment is the first one, where we really work with women to empower them, young diplomats to encourage their entry into the sector, male champions that want to support the network and make space for women water diplomats in their worlds. Peer-to-peer learning is our modus operandi, really, of the network. We have so much capacity in the network, so much knowledge and experience. It's really about making space to and accessing that knowledge. We're also trying to get a research cooperation agenda off the ground. You can see in the literature there are not as many women engaged in research processes in these networks either, and those researchers in many countries become very important, influential intermediaries in diplomatic processes, bringing their knowledge to those discussions. And finally, events like this, where we're engaging with the public, elevating messages, coming to conferences and whatnot. Pillar 5 is really about organizations like ELI and SIWI who support the network. And we do monitoring and evaluation, resource mobilization, and that kind of thing to support the objectives identified by the Leadership Council and the strategy. We have a lot of partners. Some of them are here today, so very much thank you to the Netherlands and the US State Department who are with us in the room today. Also, Sweden and UNDP. Our partners in Central Asia include the Organization for Cooperation and Security, or Cooperation and Security in Europe, and the Central Asia Regional Environmental Center, who is our local partner really driving this process in Central Asia and Afghanistan, and a number of institutional partners that have been helping us along the way. We're really grateful to you all. We really believe that we're a community that's stronger together, and so we look for opportunities to collaborate and with complementary expertise along the journey. That is it from me. I have the very lovely opportunity to introduce a wealth of experience in this panel. Their bios are available in full on the website. I will introduce each one and ask them to join me on the stage here. We do hope to have opportunities for some questions and answers after some of our own questions have an opportunity to be responded to. So if something comes to your mind, please get ready to hold your hand up during the open discussion. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome to the stage Tanya Trujillo. Tanya is the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the U.S. Department of Interior. She's been an amazing champion of the network these last years, joining us in events in Stockholm, at the UN, and a number of other different locations. She is a water lawyer with really more than 30 years of experience working in complex natural resource management issues. She most recently worked as a project director for the Colorado River Sustainability Campaign, and before that was the executive director of the Colorado River Board of California. She has served as senior counsel to the U.S. Energy and Natural Resources Committee and as counselor to the Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of Interior. Welcome, Tanya. Next to her is Dr. Annalise Bloom. Dr. Bloom is a hydrologist with experience in climate, water, national security policy. She served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the U.S. Department of Interior, working really closely with the U.S. Geological Survey and the Bureau of Reclamation. Previously, she served at the DoD, the Department of Defense, as a Senior Advisor for Climate Policy and an American Association for Advancement of Science Policy Fellow, for which she was awarded the Office of the Secretary of Defense Medal for Exceptional Public Service. Dr. Bloom has over a decade of experience leading multidisciplinary research focused on water security, extreme events, and the impact of climate change. Welcome very much, Dr. Bloom. Online, you're going to meet very shortly Fumin Furo. Fumin is one of our founding network members from Afghanistan. She holds an MSc in hydraulics from Ferdowski University, and until recently served as the general director of the Kabul River Basin Authority. This is the largest water basin in Afghanistan. And of course, when the Taliban took over Kabul, all women professionals were no longer able to undertake their professional roles, including Fumin. So since that time, she's relocated to our neighbor in Canada, where she's now serving as a water resource specialist and engineer at the South Nation Conservation Authority. Fumin has extensive experience in transboundary water management, serving in various capacities at the Afghan ministry, including acting director for water allocation, dam and river advisory. She participated and in some cases led negotiations with all of Afghanistan's neighbors, and she's really been an essential leader in the development of the network in Central Asia. Whew, these are long. They're just so impressive. My dear, dear friend, Dr. Zodwa Dlamini, is a seasoned international transboundary water management specialist, development professional, and senior infrastructure project manager. She was the former South African chief delegate and permanent representative on the Lesotho Highlands Water Commission for 11 years. She oversaw this major infrastructure work. Until very recently, it was the largest water infrastructure project in Africa. And so she played an enormous role in sustainable development issues in that region. Zodwa further led and really championed gender policies, gender equality policies in that basin in a really intentional and decisive manner, hiring in the end the first appointed women chief executive officer for the basin. And she was a founding member of the Women in Water Diplomacy Network in the Nile, been with us since that very first picture in Uganda, and just a pleasure to work closely with. And finally, Dr. Aubrey Paris is a senior policy advisor on gender, climate change, and innovation in the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues at the U.S. Department of State, where she leads foreign policy and public diplomacy efforts related to the nexus of gender and climate change. At the State Department, she launched the Innovation Station initiative to amplify the impact of women and girl innovators, developing solutions to climate-related challenges, while also drawing subnational connections between the domestic policy objectives and international communities. Prior to joining the State Department, Dr. Paris was a National Science Foundation Research Fellow and Energy and Climate Scholar at Princeton, where she contributed to research projects on water security, among many other issues. So, dear panelists, I invite you all to the stage. Wow, it's such a pleasure to have you all with us. I should point out before we get going that you're probably all noticing that we have this lovely clip on. This is the symbol of the Women in Water Diplomacy Network, and it was co-designed by our network just prior to our global strategy launch through a really interactive process together with several designers in Sweden. And so you'll see people wearing them here and in other events. Welcome, everyone. We're going to dive right into a discussion. Welcome, Fumin, as well. Let's start with you, Dr. Zodwa. Help us set the scene, if you would. We've heard a little bit from Hank on what is a water diplomat, why this is such an important role and opportunity for addressing some of our major security and peace issues of the day. Could you elaborate on your experience of being a water diplomat? What is this water diplomacy, especially for many of the people in the room where this is new?
Thank you so much.
Oh, your microphone is here.
Thank you so much. It's been it's such a great opportunity to be here.
and to discuss this very important subject, which is very close to my heart. And when we talk about water diplomacy, we're talking about inclusive, collaboration of various stakeholders. And these stakeholders will vary from youth, women, indigenous people, politicians, you name it. And it is not a fiefdom of exclusive individuals, which has always been, the trend in the past. However, when you look at this water diplomacy, it includes everybody because it's about collaboration. Collaboration in terms of what is needed, especially in transboundary waters. It's just that one river that we are talking about that everybody is relying on. And that river, as Hank was saying, a lot of times we take it for granted, and yet it benefits everybody. Hence, we cannot just say it belongs to a particular group and in the exclusion of others. So it's about inclusivity. But most importantly also, it brings technical, expertise as well as political expertise, you name it. It's about technical, informal, engagements as well as formal engagements. So this is exactly what we are talking about and saying, let's bring women together because we know what is important and the role that they will play. We have seen for many, many years, for many decades, where, agreements were reached without women. And most of those agreements, when you go to them, law students, when you look at them, there are so many flaws. But some of the, some of these agreements, they need to bring a tinge of the future, because most of the time we are not even certain of what the future is holding. So if we are not going to bring in, and that foresight and that vision, which will say there might be, a tinge, or there might be that climate change, and who would know better? Because women will always know. When the source is no longer, a particular source is no longer producing so much water, it's women who will know first, So it's very, very important that an inclusivity, that inclusion is always there. Be it youth, because, by the way, the future is no longer ours. It's for those we are taking from the youth, because it's their future also. And when we talk about, women involvement, that for me is very important. There's no way we can do it without their, their participation. That we have seen, in various basins, especially in the Orange Sinku, we have seen that, as well as, working in the Lesotho Highlands Water Project, involving women even at village level makes sense.
Fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Can you see why she's been a mentor to us all? Tanya, as a senior leader in the Department of Interior, what does diplomacy mean to you? And could you share with us some examples of how you have practiced diplomacy in your 30-year career of being a water lawyer and working on policy issues, including from your current role?
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to all the hosts here for having us. In particular, Elizabeth, your leadership at the network has been very inspiring, and it's been wonderful to be part of the group. I am very pleased to be here. I want to follow Hank's lead and perhaps say a thank you to my grandmother and mother, who were leaders in diplomacy as well. My grandmother was one of the first Hispanic female graduates from a small college in northern New Mexico, where I'm from, and taught in one-room school, houses in northern New Mexico to inspire the next generation after her. And my mother ensured that my brother and I were able to have a great college education and a law school education and allow us to give back to our communities. And I think that's very much the spirit of diplomacy with respect to how I've approached my career. At the department, I think one of my current roles and goals is to be able to encourage and empower the next generation of leadership. And I'm tag teaming today with our Deputy Assistant Secretary, Annalise Bloom, who you introduced earlier and really acknowledged the great leadership that she will bring to the department, and also really encouraging and reminding us of the importance of the role of science in underpowering and underpinning all of our decision-making and being the basis for the diplomacy that we have been working on. So it's been great personally to be able to be part of the team at Interior. We have lots of good leadership in place, whether we're working on transboundary issues with Canada or Mexico or throughout the global environment that we're in. So thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from Annalise as this program.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to dive into that intersection between policy and science a little bit, Dr. Bloom. We heard in your intro that you have a wealth of experience as a hydrologist engaging in the water science and data sharing from some of the most contentious basins out there. You're now focusing on policy issues. Could you give us some highlights about what you think would be important for bringing more women into this space?
Sure. Thanks so much. And thank you so much, Assistant Secretary Trujillo. It's great to get to work together on these topics. So as a scientist, not surprising, I think one of the things that's most important that we focus on is making sure that we have the data and that we're gathering the data, particularly as climate change is making everything more uncertain and more extreme. We need to make sure that we're gathering all of that kind of basic data and we're sharing it with one another so that we can have a common baseline for conversations, whether it's over shared water resources or something else, but having that common understanding, I think, is really an important first step to be able to make progress on these issues. And making sure that the information is getting to those who need it the most in communities that maybe previously haven't had access to these sort of data sources. And this has been a real push from the Biden-Harris administration, making sure our investments are informed by the best data and science. At Department of Interior, I'm lucky to work closely with the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS, the nation's earth, water, biology, and civilian mapping agency, and the USGS is playing a really important role in supporting the US, but also the world in providing data and understanding and knowledge that can inform all of these sort of discussions. So specific to water, we know a common understanding of how much water is available is often kind of this first step to cooperative management. And personally, before my policy work, I was a postdoctoral fellow at Johns Hopkins and worked with a team we formed. We called the Ad Hoc Blue Nile Forecast Group, a team of researchers working outside the region to develop seasonal forecasts. We wanted to inform the conversation on the filling of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam with hopes that we could provide this politically neutral outlook of Upper Nile flows to help inform the discussion. So just kind of personally an example of working on this sort of data. In my policy work at Interior, the Bureau of Reclamation recently released their new climate change adaptation strategy. It talks about pilots and collaborations to increase the utility of forecast-informed reservoir operations. Again, kind of how we can bring the data in to manage our water resources, particularly in light of climate change. And also, finally, the other kind of key thing, in addition to data I wanted to highlight, is making these interconnections, whether it's between hydrology and social science, whether it's between the security community and the scientists or the diplomats. And so previously I worked at DOD, and it was really interesting being there at the U.S. Department of Defense and realizing the work that I had done when I started my career on water sanitation and hygiene, or WASH, really was a security topic. And that was, I didn't think of it from a security lens when I was doing it, but working at in the security space and understanding kind of the intersection of how all of these issues are important for building security and peace was really fascinating. So I think kind of making sure that we're breaking down these silos and talking to other communities is going to be really key to advancing all the topics we care about. Thanks.
Fantastic. Wow. Dr. Paris, I wonder if you could build on some of those connections between the policy and science and really bring in the gender equality perspective from your current role. We have such an amazingly qualified panel here today. Really, the floor is yours, Dr. Paris.
Well, thank you so much for the question and for having me. You've convened a really dynamic group here, so congratulations. I think this answer really does flow naturally from Dr. Bloom's answer, because let's be honest for a moment. As policymakers, the most effective decisions that we can make will be informed by all sorts of topics. It includes economics, it includes geopolitical considerations, it includes social and cultural context, and it should also include science, right? Especially as we're thinking about things like natural resource availability, water scarcity, water excess, et cetera, when we're trying to project into the future to make decisions on things that remain uncertain. We need the best available information. What this really means is a two-way street of communication between policymakers and scientists. And this is where I think, like Dr. Bloom, it's really interesting to think with my scientist hat on, as well as with a policymaker's hat on. Seeing both sides of that conversation, or having experienced both sides of that conversation, I think there's a lot of scientists out there who are really, really eager to ensure that the data they generate are being considered by people who could use that data productively to make important decisions. And that's something that we see happening more and more in government and decision-making spheres, which is excellent. But we also need the other end of that communication as well. Policymakers need to be able to communicate with scientists about what sorts of data are missing, what information they need to make those complete decisions. I think that a lot of the times, the data that are missing, or that I've experienced people really searching for, are really the data that come from on-the-ground experiences, the lived experiences of women and girls in these highly climate-affected regions. The case studies of what they've experienced that we can also use to make decisions. We at the State Department have kind of generated an internal resource. We have a series called our Ask a Gender and Climate Expert series, where we bring in academics, many US academics who are leading on different topics in the gender and climate space, including water security. And we allow for that two-way conversation, the academics to present their findings, but also for the policymakers to say, but what about this? You know, I hear you here, but we're still missing this information to really get those conversations started. It's often those case studies and the on-the-ground examples that we're still missing and we could use more of. Thanks.
Wow, thank you. I just want to highlight to all the young people in the room as well, water diplomacy has space for lawyers, hydrologists, scientists, communicators, project managers, all sorts, and it really takes all hands on deck to deal with some of the enormous challenges across the water sector. So I really encourage you to live by this amazing examples and apply your expertise and knowledge to the water sector as we move into this very difficult times ahead. Fumin, welcome. I haven't forgot about you. Few in this room can speak to the personal trajectory of your life as a water diplomat at the fore of some of the most water insecure basins in the world, managing Afghan relations, water relations with your neighbors from Pakistan to Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan. You are the former director of Afghanistan's largest transboundary basin. I would just love it if you could share a bit about your experience as a senior negotiator. And if you would, you recently wrote an article for the Women in Water Diplomacy's newsletter highlighting the lack of women or water knowledge from Afghanistan at the UN Water Conference, given the enormous changes in the region. Could you reflect on that as well?
Hello, everyone. Thank you to give me a chance to speak in the high-level conference. As you know, the Afghanistan major river basin are shared with the neighboring countries. The Kabul River Basin, where I worked as a general manager, has been one of the most challenging area in terms of water resource management in the local level and also the regional level between two countries. Because of the climate change, the number of droughts and floods has increased, which causes water tension at all levels. In addition, the development project of both countries on the upstream and the downstream in the river basin increased tension and highlighted the issue of water scarcity and transboundary water. In addition to challenge and technical problem I faced in water resource management, I also had to face a serious traditional problem that Afghan society was dealing with. In traditional society Afghanistan, the presence of a woman as a leader was often disregarded and consistently met with challenges. However, I and other resilient Afghan women refused to give in this limitation and consistently strive to play a significant role in our country development and the management of water resource. Unfortunately, the progress in women participation in water resource management was abruptly halted with the rise of the Taliban, a fundamentalist group that opposes to women involvement in all aspects of society, culture, and policies. As one of the senior manager, I was unfortunately forced to remain at home and leave my position. While the challenge of gender inequality and displacement persists, there is immense potential in integrating gender perspective into water management and diplomacy, as well as empowering female water professionals. By involving diverse range of stakeholders, including women, we can make better informed decisions, find sustainable solutions, and promote equitable water resource management. For women professionals working in water resource management who were forcibly displaced from their careers, the situation has had profound implication for water management in Afghanistan. Gender inequality and social stereotypes has created specific barriers hindering the professional advancement of women in transboundary water sector. Women water experts often incur challenge in assessing leadership position and face exclusion from decision-making process due to particular structure and societal norms. As we know, the presence of women in water resource management yield positive effect for both resource management and communities. These effects include enhanced economic and environmental performance, gender balance and social justice, and improve a sustainable utilization of water resource. To realize this positive outcome, effective policy and measures that prioritize gender in water resource management are crucial, although such initiatives appear unlikely under the current ruling group in Afghanistan. In conclusion, by acknowledging the importance of women partnership and addressing gender-related challenge, we can pave the way for inclusive and sustainable decision-making process in water resource management in Afghanistan.
Thank you so much, Fumin. You're such an inspiration to the network. We're so lucky to have your continued engagement. As many of you know, the network kind of got one of its foundations through something in Sweden called the feminist foreign policy. And feminist foreign policy was conceived in a number of different countries, and over the years it has spread around the world, including to our neighbors here, Canada and Mexico. And it takes different forms in different countries. But Dr. Paris, I'd like to turn back to you, if you would. Thinking about the foundation of our network in feminist foreign policy, could you share with us some important values and approaches here in the United States which take into account gender equality at these intersections with climate and water?
I would love to. So I think first and foremost, it's important to understand the vast complexity of the situation that we're talking about here. What does the nexus of gender equality and climate change actually look like? Well, it has implications, of course, for natural resource availability, food, water, firewood, and other resources as well. It has implications for migration and conflict, looking at how women and girls are differentially affected by natural resource scarcity and the conflicts and other outcomes that might occur as a result. We see intersections with gender-based violence, GBV. GBV tends to increase as natural resource scarcity increases, whether that be in the home, if women and girls are seen as unable to accomplish their roles and responsibilities related to water or other natural resource procurement. GBV increases on migration routes or in temporary shelters following natural disasters. We also see child early and forced marriages increase when we see families feel the need to reduce their expenses, right, as scarcity worsens as well. Educational opportunities, livelihood opportunities, healthcare services are often disappear following natural disasters in ways that explicitly affect women and girls. So a lot of challenges. There's also opportunities, though, when we think of the green and blue economies and the jobs that are becoming available in these economies and sectors, as well as any sector transitioning to a greener, more sustainable approach. But that, of course, means ensuring that if we want women and girls to be able to take advantage of these opportunities, ensuring they have the education, training, mentorship, assets, financing, you name it, to be able to take advantage of and realize those opportunities. This really big, complex picture, which I could talk about for 20 minutes alone, you're welcome, I won't. But this complex picture really leads to the U.S. government's two-pronged approach to policy, programming, and outreach efforts related to the nexus of gender equality and climate change. On the one hand, addressing the disproportionate impacts of the climate crisis on women and girls, and on the other hand, empowering women and girls as leaders in combating the climate crisis. We've fortunately been able to institutionalize this approach in several key gender strategies of the U.S. government, including the U.S. National Strategy on Gender Equity and Equality, the recent update to the U.S. Strategy to Prevent and Respond to Gender-Based Violence Globally, which for the first time now does integrate climate change and environmental challenges, including water issues, in our GBV response approach, as well as the U.S. Strategy on Global Women's Economic Security, which was launched for the first time ever earlier this year. The last thing that I'll mention before I turn things back over is there are many ways to try to put this approach into practice. And one of the ways that we have worked on this from the Secretary's Office of Global Women's Issues is through our Innovation Station initiative, really recognizing that women and girls around the world are generating creative, translatable solutions to these climate-related challenges in their communities. So we're amplifying their work through various online formats, virtual events, podcasts, all the fun stuff, but also helping them behind the scenes to build their networks with other communities domestically and internationally that could learn from their work and implement their solutions elsewhere. So that's sort of part of our empowerment arm of that approach and how we're taking action.
That's super inspiring. Dr. Zodwa, when I was introducing you, I mentioned that you are a member of our Leadership Council and that you've been engaged in supporting the network since 2017. I wonder if you could give a little more character to the Her Story stages that I outlined in the intro and your experience as being part of that network. As everyone knows, our strategy is called the Path Forward for Women, Water, Peace, and Security, and you really bring together all of those different pieces.
When we started in 2017, we didn't know that this workshop of women was going to develop into a network. We had women who came from all the 11 countries of the Nile, and they were from the Ministry of Water as well as Foreign Affairs. but also we had members of parliament who came. And when we first started, a lot of women felt unease. And most of them, they were asking themselves, and they were even articulating it, to say that they don't think that they're at the right place. And because they did not even understand, they had never even, heard the concept of water diplomacy. And, there was, we had to, with all the other support system, ladies that were there, ambassadors from Netherlands, and also ambassadors from Sweden, who had been working in the area of peace negotiations. And they were, it was like, wow, we have never heard of so many powerful women who had been negotiating for peace. And then others, my colleagues also from ELI, Jennifer. So you, Jessica, you were at that time, you could see that there was a thirst to do something, but they did not know how, whether they were the right persons, because they kept on looking at themselves to say, but I'm only an assistant director in the organization. What kind of impact can I make? But the long and short of it all, by the third day, everybody felt that they had a chance, but also they belonged there. And we started, strategizing, but also giving personal, experiences as we were sharing with them where we came from and what it is that we have been through, and how we are going to assist them to understand their role, and also not to undermine the kind of, abilities and experiences that they were going to be bringing. So that made a huge impact. But as we continued in that workshop, 2018, 19, a lot of things happened. But most importantly, which I would want to also share, is that even during the COVID-19 period, as Elizabeth was talking about it, is that most of the people that we are talking about, the women we are talking about, are from areas where, connectivity is not a given. It's a challenge. And there were times when we would be there, some would be coming in, and and there would be an interruption. But as Elizabeth said, a lot of them kept on, entering and being there, to be seen, but also to participate. So it was not easy to really build the network. And thanks to women such as Elizabeth Koch, as well as Julian and Alexandra, those were people that kept on the ship, afloat, so that we could achieve what we achieved within that space of time. In that year, 2021, Afghanistan as well as Central Asia, a network was born there. And then during that very year, the Leadership Council for the Nile Basin was formed. And during that very time, a pathway, our strategy was developed. And thanks to the various development partners, as well as various others that assisted in terms of reviewing the strategy, but also, SIWA brought in the element of male champions. That was very, very important because, as Hank said, there's no way that women only can, succeed in diplomatic, missions without men being there. All we are asking for is, equality. Let women also participate because we have a right to be there. We have a right to participate. And that is what we're able to do. And in 2022, we were able to then, launch the strategy during the Stockholm World Water Week. And we also held our very first global forum in Stockholm. So that is what this was all about. And this is where we are. And since then, we have been able to continue to hold, various workshops, that is virtually, because we had to adapt. Thank you so much.
And I should note, fantastic. Dr. Zodwa is leading the charge on establishing new chapters of the Women in Water Diplomacy Network in Southern African basins. She mentioned the Ornsenku, the Okavanga, and our dear partners in the Zambezi Commission as well are all really involved these days in the network. And I would be remiss to mention that we're really crossing our fingers and hoping to launch Canada, US, Mexico network as well, with really strong leadership and anchorage with Indigenous women who are taking the charge and leading water diplomacy issues across this region. We're running out of time, so I'm going to skip over to you, Dr. Bloom, and ask you a question on that very issue. President Biden made history in selecting Secretary Deb Haaland to be the first Native American Secretary of the Department of Interior. What are some of the steps that have occurred to ensure that Indigenous knowledges and viewpoints are part of decision-making here?
Thank you so much for that question. Yeah, it's a really big push across the whole Department of Interior and broader U.S. government right now to include Indigenous knowledge and decision-making, because we know that it contributes to our collective understanding of the natural world and it enables us to make better decisions and make better policy. So as the department continues to implement President Biden's Investing in America agenda, we're making sure that the Indigenous worldviews are at our decision-making tables, including with Indigenous women and girls whose knowledge of the community and environmental needs is indispensable in designing and implementing culturally appropriate solutions. Incorporating Indigenous knowledge and decision-making also empowers communities to participate in stewardship of their land, and domestically is a cornerstone of President Biden's environmental policies. Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland created the first ever Secretary's Tribal Advisory Committee so that tribal leaders could have direct and consistent contact and communication with the department on issues including how we can incorporate Indigenous knowledge. At the USGS, which is a focus of the work I do, there have been long-standing relationships with tribes. One recent initiative through the National Climate Adaptation Science Centers is a webinar series on how we can integrate Indigenous knowledge into federal research and resource management programs. The series centered on Indigenous voices to explore ethical, legal, and scientific considerations for working within different knowledge systems and provides guidance reflecting best practices. So if you're interested in those, they're all recorded and available online and a really interesting compilation of how we can start thinking more deeply about this from Indigenous communities. A specific example out of the Pacific Islands Climate Adaptation Science Center that is really exciting is an effort led in part by Hawaiian women to understand how original inhabitants of the Hawaiian Islands responded to droughts by exploring traditional texts, newspapers, and Hawaiian language chants. And these efforts, of course, go broader than the Interior Department. We're working with Department of Agriculture on similar things. The White House also issued a memorandum that commits to elevating Indigenous knowledge in federal scientific and policy processes. And on a personal note, since you meant the historic nature of Secretary Haaland's nomination, Personally, I'm really proud to be part of the Biden-Harris administration, which has such a historic number of women in high-level government roles, including my boss, Assistant Secretary Trujillo, and her boss, Secretary Holland, who's an Indigenous woman, and her Pueblo community is traditionally matriarchal. Thanks.
Really, truly inspiration. We had a chance to interact with the Secretary at the UN Water Conference, and I would say one of our biggest takeaways as the Women in Water Diplomacy Network was the opportunity to engage and partner with Indigenous leaders across this network, across this region as well. Governor Stephen Rowe Lewis brought this important phrase to our discussions, teaching us their experience in forcing inclusion. And I think that really put kind of a name to a lot of the work that we're doing in the network. No one is making space without efforts to expand the dialogue and the decision-making table. Fumin, I'm going to turn back to you. We're clearly running out of time. We're hoping to have yet one question, but Kaylee's giving me the hard pass. I would like you all to join us after this event concludes and bring your questions to our panelists and between yourselves in a small reception we'll have outside. So don't forget your questions. We just have too much to say. Fumin, I'd love to hear how you're bringing your experience of, the director of the Kabul River Basin Authority to your new role in Canada, and how your experience and priorities is translated to your new role. What policy initiatives you're excited about in Canada?
Thank you. Fortunately, in Canada and South Nation conservation, we don't deal with the transboundary water management, but the South Nation watershed is so near to the US, and as far as I know, there are joint committee between the two countries that work well together and even share information, something that really happened in Afghanistan and Central Asia. And in my new career, I faced a new problem, like floods. During the climate change, floods occur most in this region. And because of a sharing basin with the US and with Canada, we most know about the data, about the flow, about everything that appear in the shared river basin. And after that, we can plan a strategy for or master plan for river basin. So in this career, I most focus on sharing data, give the data, and after that, we can make a watershed plan to have a secure plan for people and reduce the impact of the flood on people. Now I work on this, and I love this because I'm a scientist and also I'm a water diplomat, so I can make this together and improve and develop a good strategy.
Fantastic. And you can really see the passion for water across the faces of all of our panelists, including yourself, Fumin. Tanya Trujillo, I'm going to wrap up with you because you started off giving us a good message around supporting youth engagement. And I just would like if you could share why this is, again, so important and give some inspiration to some of the young people here.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you to all the panelists for the inspiring messages. I think a lot of us have similar themes in what we've been able to say, and I think one of them is the fact that water does unite us and is able to bring people together and bring women together. And so I am very encouraged and inspired by the next generation who's coming behind us, and really wish everyone well with the ongoing work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much. We've obviously gone over a few minutes. Thank you as well to all the participants online, and to our amazing panel. A round of applause. And I'll invite Kaylee back up to give us a closing remark.
I will keep it brief, don't worry. This is just a thanks again for the panelists and also our co-organizers, including Elizabeth, who put in some Herculean effort to make this happen. We're very pleased you're here with us, and we hope to welcome you again back to USIP in the near future. For now, I invite everyone to join us outside of the auditorium for some refreshments and treats, another networking opportunity for the great water and women diplomats here tonight. Thank you.